And Intel shares are surging this morning after Nvidia announced a $5 billion investment in the company. The two companies will also work together to develop chips for data centers and PCs. Joining us for more, Patrick Moorhead, Moor Insights Strategy founder, CEO, and chief analyst. Pat, you are steeped in these semiconductor companies. You know the history well, you know the product cycle well. What does this mean? I mean, this is a surprise here. What does this mean for Intel? First of all, let's take that part of it.
Yeah, Intel is very straightforward. There's nothing but upside for Intel here. It's net gains on the PC front and net gains on the AI and data center fronts, and no question about it. I think the only question here, I think I was expecting a little bit more conversation about foundry. And while it's true that the x86 chiplets are made by Intel Foundry, I was looking for something a little bit more, maybe a larger deal that said that Intel would be manufacturing NVIDIA GPUs. It's not that it's not going to happen, it just wasn't part of this announcement.
Yeah, and Pat, that's really interesting that you picked up on that, because obviously this has been the big question for Intel and the foundry business, right? It's making chips for itself, but when is it going to get some other clients outside of it? What does this say that NVIDIA is not making that part of this agreement today? Does that imply it doesn't have the confidence in Intel's capacity to do so?
I think it's, well, first of all, Intel has a roadmap of foundry, right? They have 18A, and then a year later 18AP, and then what's called 14A after that. And I do believe that NVIDIA is evaluating those different processes and steps, and I do believe there are negotiations that are going on. And by the way, that's not just NVIDIA. I think that's Apple and other companies out there. NVIDIA has loyalty to TSMC, and I think that doing something like this might be viewed as maybe a lack of loyalty, as opposed to, let's say, a lack of Intel not having the technology. I think there are good questions on execution. I think as soon as Intel cranks out its own Intel 18A chips, the first one called Panther Lake, in a few months, I think confidence will absolutely rise. And I do think that we will see some foundry customers sign up with Intel.
And from NVIDIA's side, NVIDIA obviously is not a charity, right? So there must be something in this agreement for them. What did they get out of it?
Yeah, so I think what it does, it gives them optionality. So let's look at the PC side first. AMD is making waves in the PC market right now. They're taking market share, and every single socket that goes in with an AMD CPU and an AMD GPU means that NVIDIA might not be part of it. NVIDIA still owns the higher end of the GPU market, but what this does is gives them an extra added competitive boost here, another option that might be able to better compete, quite frankly, with Apple, where you have a super high-end GPU and an optimized CPU from Intel that runs x86 software, which is really important right now, where most games, most pro developers are x86 and instruction sets. So it gives them potential upside there. It really is about optionality. I did talk to sources last night who told me that the NVIDIA roadmap is not going to change, which means that they will have both ARM and Intel options out there for their end customers, for the hyperscalers, for enterprises and people like that. I do think, let's say these new products come out in 2.5 years from now, it might lead to confusion, but listen, one person's confusion is another person's optionality, and whether you want to pick Intel or whether you want to pick ARM for the CPU, all things equal, more options are better for end customers.
Pat, to take a step back for a moment, I was just looking at some historical charts of the two this morning. I was looking at market cap of Intel versus NVIDIA. I was looking at quarterly revenue of Intel versus NVIDIA. And it is just remarkable the path. I mean, here's the market cap. Intel's kind of been bumping along there for a while. Nvidia obviously took off when its revenue took off and its forecasts took off. But, Intel was the giant for so long. And now Nvidia is so dominant. I'm just curious for your sort of thoughts and perspective on that, for, having covered this industry for so long.
Sure. And, I spent 11 years at AMD and I saw the ups and downs. And what happened, three things happened. First of all, Intel lost the plot when it came to foundry and foundry technologies. And what that did is that gave AMD the potential to go in and work with TSMC with more modern types of architectures that are used in the industry today. And then you had the AI boom, which the dollars of revenue, the CPU market's not going down. But what happened is the AI GPU, the AI accelerator market absolutely took off. And what Intel did is they missed the data center AI boom related to data center GPUs. And, which is surprising. I mean, the company had a design called Larrabee that didn't work out. They had their own. They made two acquisitions of companies, and they do have in market a product called Gaudi 3 that's very competitive on specific workloads. It's very similar to the accelerators, homegrown accelerators used by the hyperscalers. But and let's say a couple $1 billion of revenue, but compared to the hundreds and billions of dollars of revenue that Nvidia is doing, they missed the market takeoff. And it doesn't say that people at Intel don't understand or they're not technologically advanced. Mm-hmm. Doing GPUs is very difficult, and this is why Nvidia is ahead and AMD is a distant second in terms of market share. These companies have been doing GPUs for 30 years. Right. This is difficult tech.
Yeah. Difficult tech, and one that obviously NVIDIA hit at the right moment as well for this AI moment that we're in. Pat, thank you so much for joining us. It's always great to get your perspective on this stuff. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Julie.
Join me now for more on this. Stacy Rasgon, Bernstein Managing Director, Senior Analyst, longtime coverer, a follower of this industry. Stacy, this was quite a surprise this morning. I think it is fair to say. What's your sort of first blush reaction?
I mean, look, so, we've had a number of other, if you want to call them co-investments in Intel over the last few weeks. We had the big governmental investment for a little under $9 billion. We had the SoftBank investment for $2 billion. I think it's not, people were expecting that we might see others. I'd say with this one, it was surprising maybe for two reasons. One is the magnitude of the investment. $5 billion, at least for Intel, is a lot of money. Maybe not as much, it's not for NVIDIA a lot of money, but for Intel a lot of money. And quite a bit bigger than, say, what we saw for SoftBank. And second, I think the nature of the other collaboration. I think a lot of folks have been hoping for a manufacturing or foundry partnership. This is not that. This is a product partnership, and I think it makes sense because there's Intel's process tech and their manufacturing flow is still up in the air. We don't know, but their product business needs actually a lot of help as well. I mean, they've been kind of bleeding share in a lot of other areas, and so. To the extent that, a partner like NVIDIA, who is, big and important, to the extent that they can come in and maybe help Intel's product business, maybe that can help carry Intel along to the point where they can get the rest of the company together. But I don't know that people were expecting like a very significant product partnership. And that's actually what, at least at first glance, it looks like we have here today.
Well, and Stacy, I earlier talked to Pat Moorhead, another, longtime veteran chip analyst, and he pointed out NVIDIA's partnership, and partnership might be even too light of a word for its involvement with TSMC, its reliance on TSMC. Yeah. So, at some point, do you expect it to give some of its manufacturing to Intel? But how does it do that in a sort of delicate way, given the partnership with TSM?
I mean, look, TSMC is a fantastic company. Everybody relies on them, and that's part of the issue. Nobody likes to be single sourced for these sorts of things. You want other sources, and there aren't really a lot of other options right now. There's only 3 companies that even in theory can do leading edge manufacturing. It's TSMC, Samsung, and Intel, and mostly it's TSMC. So people do want second sources. I'd also say, just given the USA first kind of dynamic around the new administration, I mean, clearly there is a broader desire to do more in the US. And again, only one of those three companies is US headquarters, that is Intel. Now, that being said, like there's not a lot that can happen, to force or encourage customers to use Intel's manufacturing because there's nothing to use yet. And I've made this point before. Nobody really needs to force or encourage customers to use Intel. If Intel can prove that they can make products in high volume that meet spec at a good cost that are available on time, that's table stakes for a foundry. But if they can prove they can do that, they'll have customers lined up around the block to use them. Like, I guarantee you, nobody will do TSMC partnerships or no. If Intel cannot prove that they can do that, no customer in their right mind would ever put any kind of meaningful volume at them. So it's on Intel to execute there. And we're not there yet. So I mean, like it's going to take a while. We'll have to see. In the meantime, though, I mean, if you can help Intel support the product business and improve the market share and the competitiveness of those products, that also brings more money and further competitiveness into the company, and maybe it helps them along that path as they are trying to get their manufacturing ducks in a row.
Does this open the door at all to a possible Nvidia takeover of all of Intel?
I'm not going to speculate on. I've learned long ago never to speculate on AMD on M&A in the press. So I'm not gonna even go.
Fair enough. Okay, so I'll ask you then what investors should do. I mean, you've got to market perform on Intel. Its challenges are well known. Does this investment, though, and not just this investment, but the investments, to your point, that we've seen over the past month or so, does that make a better case for getting into Intel here?
I mean, look, this is clearly a positive for Intel for two reasons. Although I will say also, like, we don't know what the economics of this are going to look like either, right? It looks like they may be buying, chiplets from Nvidia. Like, I don't know what the margins will look like, but in general, I would say like the money is good. They could use the money. That's fine. And I'd say, having Jensen's blessing is probably priceless, right? So it's incremental. Now, is it 25% better for Intel? Like, I don't know, but it's clearly incrementally better for Intel. It's incrementally, positive for Nvidia. And you could argue about some of the others, like companies like AMD are down today because, like Intel competes with them. So is it, at least from a narrative standpoint, is it incrementally worse for AMD or some of the others? Like maybe, like that's possible. But this is a positive, development for Intel, like for sure.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about AMD and ARM as well, because those are the two that stick out to me as being lower as a result of this. Does it actually is it just perception, or do you think it's reality that it puts them at a disadvantage?
Well, like on the PC side, I mean, Intel will be developing presumably better chips. Like, call me in a few years. It'll take several years to develop that. But, AMD's been doing pretty well, like on market share there. And so, I mean, yeah, if Intel can develop more competitive products, that would be a positive for Intel's share and a negative for others. And then on the data center side, at this point, a lot of the CPUs that are actually going into the big Blackwell RAMs at this point are actually ARM-based. They're NVIDIA's own, like, Grace Blackwell chips. But there are some of those things that also ship with Intel processors and AMD processors. Again, if more of that volume, at least incrementally, is going to Intel, presumably it would be coming, at the expense of others, either AMD or ARM. Yeah.
It occurs to me as we're having this whole conversation, there's one word that hasn't come up in this conversation, and that word is China, right? This news has superseded the reports that about the anti-monopoly investigation from China, about them telling people.
That was yesterday.
I mean, that said, it doesn't seem like investors have been overly concerned about the China story for Nvidia.
Well, they haven't. Nvidia stock was down, not a ton yesterday, but a little bit. But you have to remember, Nvidia took China out of their numbers.
Right.
So to the extent that they're not selling in China, at least there's no near-term revision risks from Nvidia. Now you could argue like the long-term strategic issues of Nvidia and even others, AMD, others are not allowed to compete in China. There are other potentially broader strategic things that we could discuss, but at least in the very near to medium term, China's out of the numbers anyways. So to the extent that they're not selling into China or they're not allowed to sell in China, it prevents the opportunity for upside, but it's already out of the numbers. So you don't really have to worry that much about downside, at least for now.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk much more about that another time when we get more headlines. Stacy, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet.